My name's Daniel Dees, and I'm a movement disorders neurologist at the University of South Alabama in Mobile, Alabama. I'm the movement disorders program director at the College of Medicine there. I'm the third and fourth year medical student clerkship director, so I get to train young doctors how to go be young doctors. And then also we have neurology residents there, so training neurology residents how to go be neurologists, which is a lot of fun. I'm really happy to be here. This is going to be a good time. So this is totally not a lecture, okay? Like, we're just hanging out talking about brains. So, like, if you got questions in the middle of it, fire them off. Like, it'll be way more entertaining that way. Also, we can take, like, over-under spreads. I'm supposed to talk in this thing, but I like to move around, and I know that I'm going to get excited and end up, like, over there at some point in time. But I think for entertainment purposes, the question's going to be when this little purple sticker that says speaker goes flying off my tag. Like, yeah, I think it's going to be in, like, I don't know, 40 minutes. So what we're talking about is, so I got my gene testing, I'm genetic positive, now what happens, right? I want to thank Huntington's Disease Society of America for letting me be here. It's a fantastic organization to be able to work with. I get to work with them as a Center of Excellence site in Mobile, partnered with University of Alabama, Birmingham. It's a wonderful organization that they put this stuff on. I think it's so cool, so that's pretty great. There's the QR code. Take pictures of it if you want. I'm going to flash it up there at the very end. That'll be good too. So chorea, the idea of Huntington's disease, named at, I always think the history of whatever you're doing, like whatever you're talking about, if you understand the history of it, that can be a really helpful thing. Now the reality is, with things like Huntington's disease, well, these have been around for a really long time. I don't know how long have people been around, right? Like, long enough. But classically first described by George Huntington, he was a primary care doctor in New York in 1872. And he's the first one that kind of put this out and started talking about it, and then other doctors started learning about it. Now, I always wonder when I see these slides, like, how do I know that's him? Like, I don't know if it's him. And I always think of, like, it's a total different thing. But you've probably heard of Parkinson's disease. Totally different thing, not related in any way, shape, or form. And when you Google James Parkinson, this famous guy, his picture comes up. And we know that's not him. I don't know who that guy is, but I know. I didn't write the internet, man. Like, I don't know what happened. But I think it's hilarious. Like, I can show you pictures of his front door. It's this, like, yellow house outside of London. You don't care. Like, I can show you pictures of diagrams. He would do diagrams for the local paper. Again, nobody cares. So I always wonder if that really is George Huntington. I don't know, man. So let's talk about the genetics of Huntington's. I think before we can say what happens when I'm gene positive, we have to understand what does that number mean, that CAG repeat mean, okay? So Huntington's disease is a CAG repeat problem. And so it's a trinucleotide. We're talking about DNA, and you get these trinucleotides of DNA, and they tend to get, like, actually pretty commonly, not just in this one location on the short arm of chromosome 4, but they're all over the place in our DNA, where you get these repeats that are just kind of like space holders for our genes. And the problem in Huntington's disease is when you start getting too many of these identical repeats, these CAG repeats over and over and over again, and then when you get too many of them, it starts creating problems. So So we talk about the numbers of CAG repeats and how that affects how old you're going to be when the actual the movement disorder that is Huntington's disease starts. So what's interesting is that if you have, for the big picture here, if you have less than 32 CAG repeats, we're going to say that you're not going to get Huntington's disease. If we say that you have more than 36 CAG repeats, then you're going to get Huntington's disease. If you have some like much bigger number, like I'm just making up like huge numbers, I don't know, like 70 CAG repeats, you're going to get this really early in life, so you can actually have childhood onset Huntington's. If you have something like 37 CAG repeats, so you're like just above that threshold, this is probably going to have onset much later in life. So you can have onset at like age 80, something like that, if you're just above that threshold of number of CAG repeats. And then what's really fascinating about this whole concept is that means I said less than 32, not going to get it. More than 36, we say, yeah, that's gene positive. And then there's a gray area in between. And what does that mean, right? So let's say if your CAG number is like 34, you're right in the middle of the gray area. And then that means, I don't know. Maybe you're going to get this. Maybe you're not going to get this. How long are you going to live? I don't know. And maybe it's if, if you made it to age 120, then you would get it. But, I'm an optimist, but 120, I'm not going to make 120. I feel confident about that. So there's that gray area there where you just don't know. And then it gets even more interesting from the genetic standpoint. So Huntington's disease is autosomal dominant. And so that means, say, if I have Huntington's disease and then I have children, then each of my children will have a 50% chance. Like you have a 50% chance of getting this gene, and then it doesn't matter what your number is. And then this child has a 50% chance of getting this gene, and it doesn't matter what the other two children's number, and then the third one has a 50% chance. It's not, which is very different than saying like, hey, so I'm Huntington's gene positive, I have two children, therefore it is guaranteed that one is going to get this and one is not going to get this. That's not how the probability game goes, right? So each individual has a 50% chance. I like big loud car engines too, so who am I to get in the way of that? and then it gets even more interesting. That how you inherit this from mom is a little bit different than how you inherit this from dad. And that's real weird in genetics, okay? So what that means is that we're just making up the numbers, right? So let's say that if mom has 42 CAG repeats, that CAG number is really stable in an egg, and it doesn't vary much up or down. So it'll make, maybe like up or down by like 1 or 2, So in other words, so if mom has 42, then, and then I get it from mom, then maybe I'm going to have something like 40. Maybe I'm going to have something like 44, but it's really not going to vary too much from that. Versus if I get it from dad, so those CAG repeat numbers, when you get it from dad and that sperm, they become very not stable, and they tend to go up or down by a lot more. So when you get it from dad, you can go up or down by like 7 or 8, right? Which is a pretty big difference. So now we're going to use that same scenario. So let's say like, what if dad had 42 CAG repeats, and then maybe I'm going to go up by like 7, and so then I have 49 CAG repeats, and that would be enough of a difference that I could say, I don't know how old dad was when he started getting the movements, but maybe I'm going to start getting the movements a little bit earlier than dad. Or it can go in the other direction, right? So maybe dad had 42, maybe I'm going to get, 37, and that's enough of a difference that maybe I'm going to have onset of my actual movements a little bit later than dad, right? And then the really wild things can happen when, we'll say dad has 42, and I go down to like 35 or 34. And now I got the gene from dad, but I'm no longer in the gene positive group. Now I'm in that gray area. And maybe I'm going to get this and maybe I'm not. Like, I don't know, right? And that's pretty interesting in genetics. There's not a whole lot of examples I can think of like that. So from an age range standpoint, just of everybody, we say that average age onset of the actual movements of it is about age 40. And then once the movements start going, this tends to progress over, 15, 20 years, something like that. Everybody's different as far as how the thing kind of starts out and progresses and goes from there. I'm a supreme optimist. There, I admitted it to the room, okay? Like I try to hide it, like in the back, in a little bag or something, but I'm absolutely an optimist. So I love this quote from Ram Dass. I'm not this body, I'm in this body, and this is part of my incarnation, and I honor it, but it's not who I am. This is just the vessel that the loud car engine that carries me around the world, right? But who I am is up here, this is me. And, that idea that one of the reasons it really got me into wanting to be a neurologist is because, I'm very happy that I have a pancreas. Like, I need that pancreas. But that pancreas is not who I am. Like, it's a piece of the automobile. But this thing up here, this is who I am. So I thought that was the much more fascinating thing when I was going through my studies, and I wanted to be a neurologist. Okay, so we kind of did some of the backgrounds of how the genes work. And we said, okay, well, what happens when I'm G positive, now what? And it's easy, I think, to focus on the movement disorders, the individual movements that is Huntington's disease and all this type of stuff. But it's a lot more than that, right? So you get into things like depression, anxiety, irritability, anger, frustration, all this type of stuff, of dealing with this type of thing. Although, a lot of people, if they know that family history, and even when they haven't had the genetic testing, but they know that, hey, I may get this, they're going to have all these things too. Like, you'll see people that they haven't got the genetic. I think of this one guy, he's just a wonderful man. He's probably in his mid-30s, and his mom was gene positive for Huntington's disease. And he kind of went through all of his life having this thing hanging over his head, and he didn't know yes or no, what is this thing? And he let that run his life until he was in his mid-30s or so. And he got into like alcohol addiction, and then he didn't like that. And then he had a young family, and he had a lot of anxiety, and he was really doing all the counseling and all the psychiatry, psychology. I mean, like, he was putting a lot of effort into this thing, and it really developed like great coping mechanisms, and like he was on top of his game. And he didn't even know if he was plus or minus, if he was genetic positive or genetic negative, but that thing is hanging over his head. And then you don't know until you go do that genetic testing. And so we had talked a lot about it, of what does this mean if you're gene positive, or what does this mean if you're gene negative? And he had such a great viewpoint on it, which was, look, like, I've come to peace with this in both ways, right? Which is always a really, if you can honestly say that to yourself, this is the big decision that's happening in my life. I don't have any control over it, but I've already made my peace with either outcome, then that's a pretty good place to be, all right? And he told me that he felt foolish for letting that run his life for so long, right? That was the predominant thing, like, hanging over his head for something like he was like 35 years old. So since he was, 8 years old or something, old enough to kind of figure this thing out, to know, hey, this is happening. This is powerful stuff, man. With him, we ended up doing the gene testing with him, and he was gene negative. Right? And then that's such a powerful thing of thinking, wow, I had this thing. And then that's a really difficult thing to deal with too. Because now all of my life I've had this big thing hanging over my head. And that has become a part of how I view myself as a person. And now all of a sudden that fundamentally changed. And there's not very many things in life that can do that can fundamentally change how you view yourself as a person. And whenever you have that type of a giant dynamic shift in life, that's really stressful, And it seems like such a strange thing to say when you're talking about, hey, this is wonderful news. We did the genetic testing, and you're genetic negative, and you're not going to get, your children aren't going to get Huntington's, all that type of stuff. But he recognized, hey, I got a lot of things I got to go work on now, because he had the insight to realize that's a big deal, right? Because that story could have just as easily turned out in the other direction, and then he's gene positive. I think whenever you're talking about those giant like swings in life, like I said, kind of recognizing both sides of it, coming to peace with both sides of it, having that self-awareness to realize that, hey, this is where I'm at, you know? And that regardless of what this outcome is, gene positive or gene negative, one of the most critical things is life moves on, right? Like, life doesn't end with this genetic testing. So the things that you like to get out and enjoy doing, go get out and enjoy doing those things, you know? The people that you enjoy loving, your family and your friends and that type of stuff, get out and go enjoy doing those things. Get out and love and connect with those family and friends, you know? You make the most out of your life in the time that you have in the area that you serve, right? So this is a big breakdown, and we're going to go through this kind of step by step, just looking at the numbers and percentages. As we're looking at this stuff, we're just paying attention to the red numbers, okay? Because the light blue numbers are like comparing to Parkinson's disease, and we're not talking about Parkinson's disease today. And then the dark blue numbers are comparing with just general population, and we're not talking about that today. But when you look at this graph, the things that really show up, depression and anxiety, right? So general population, about 15% of people get depression. Anxiety, about 18% of people get anxiety. In the Huntington's patients, that's about 40% and 34%. So 40% of anybody, like any group, that's a lot of people, right? And, you know, from a depression standpoint, one, you know, I think it's important to realize that it's okay that I'm depressed. But then, so let's not ignore it, but let's be willing to talk about it, you know, with friends, family, whomever. And be willing to talk about it within yourself. Be willing to recognize that this is okay. This is where I'm at. And particularly us guys. Like, I'm going to pick on us guys. Okay, so my advice to you is never underestimate the stubbornness of the adult male. It's so true. Yeah, it's real. I get to say that because I am one. Okay, so depression and anxiety. Like recognizing this thing is here, and for us guys, like we feel like it's not okay. I'm a big, strong man. Here I go, big, strong man. And it's not okay that I have feelings like depression, anxiety, inferiority, sadness, loneliness, big, strong man, right? And that's so silly. And so then, like, clearly we're going to get these emotions. These are normal human emotions for everybody to get. And instead of accepting those emotions, we take it out in different ways. So, like, we tend to get really, like there's different ways that people will say it. Get really angry really fast. Just shut down. Don't talk to anybody. You know, he's got a short fuse, you know, that type of stuff. You know, depression could show up in a lot of other ways too, like I don't want to get out of bed. Like I stay in bed for something like, I don't know, 18 hours a day and I don't want to, you know. Or, you know, not enjoying the things that you've always enjoyed doing, you know. I don't know. What's a hobby? Somebody yell out a hobby that you love doing. Cycling. I heard that one. The rest of it, was it cycling? Recycling? Yeah, you take the bicycles and you smash them up and you turn them into more bicycles. It's great. Like little tiny bicycles, like maybe like the size, like little mice can ride the bicycles. Yeah, there you go, like the Shriners, yeah. So you got to get out and go enjoy, and bicycling is a really good one actually, or cycling, or was it spin classes? See, I used to exercise, I know these things. You got to get out and go do that stuff. But actually, the cycling's a really good one to be talking about because you got to get out of the house, get out in the sunshine, you know, go do stuff, exercise. Oh my God, man! Like if you want, like one of the best things for depression, stress, anxiety, go exercise. Okay. Does anyone here have a stressed out, anxious little puppy dog? Yeah. Maybe they are, maybe like whenever you like leave the house and they get like that separation anxiety and then, and then the pillows are everywhere or something. Like they're dealing with the anxiety too. Like this is it's not even a normal human emotion. Oh, that's a dog. Like it's a normal, like mammalian emotion at least, right? So if dogs can get things like depression and anxiety, then, dolphins and whales get depression and anxiety. Somewhere out there, there's a very sad, lonely whale just floating around, thinking I should get some exercise and maybe I'll eat that krill tomorrow. I love whales. They're fascinating. So you got to get out and go do the stuff. The hardest day to exercise is the second day. Oh yeah, because then you're sore and you're like, oh, I did the thing, I exercised, all right, great, where's the chocolate cake? It's not a good way to do it. I think it's taking that negative energy and then rolling that up and then pushing it into some sort of positive outcome, some sort of positive thing. So maybe you have the anxious puppy dog or something like that. And the dog just needs to go on a walk. Not that it needs to get out its poops and peeps, but it just wants to get out and, stretch its legs and go on the walk, and then we go on the walk, and then, I feel so much better. Hey, let's lay on the couch, something like that. Right? Clearly, I need a dog. I mean, I can't walk a whale, so this is where I'm at with it. Social groups. Don't isolate yourself. And wherever you can find those social groups. I mean, that's one of the most amazing things about this meeting is you're getting people from all over the country coming in and talking about this, and like, these are your people. These are my people. That's so cool, right? But there's social groups around wherever you are. Just go seek them out. And different people can find those things in different ways, right? Like some people can find them like at church or at the community center or, hanging out. And I always think of my grandfather because he did like the class, he was middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. Thomas, Oklahoma, if you know that one. And, every day he'd go down to the coffee shop with his buddies. He's retired and they had two coffees. Big day if you put a little bit of sugar in the coffee. But that was the thing, and that was his kind of community that he was a part of. So, and then, like, there's some inherent advantages that we get now versus, maybe 20 years ago, is there's a lot of online resources, too. So there's a lot of online support groups and all that type of stuff to be a part of. Go join those things. Of course, with the disclaimer of be careful what you read on the internet, right? I mean, like, sometimes there's silly things on the internet. Let's talk about the difference between psychiatrist and psychologist, because these are going to be important resources. I think a lot of people, maybe we don't talk about the differences between them, but they're very different. But they really work together like hand in hand. So the psychiatrist, that's like you classically think of, this is the guy that's going to be writing the prescriptions. So he's an expert in things like depression, anxiety, stress, anger, schizophrenia, bipolar, like those sort of like mental health things. And they're really underutilized, I think. Because so many people say, big strong man, I don't need to go to the psychiatrist. I'm not crazy. What are you talking about, man? Like if you had a heart attack, you go to the cardiologist, right? Like if you got, lung problems, you go to the pulmonologist. If you've got stress, anxiety, depression, you go to the psychiatrist. Like that's the one that is the most trained to go do the job. Versus like the psychologist. So a psychologist is PhD, psychiatrist is MD, equal number of years of training. And the psychologist is going to do more like, we're not doing pills. We're going to be talking about learning things like coping mechanisms for what's going on. Like, let's sit and talk about it, and holy crap, by the way, let's not underestimate coping mechanisms, right? And like, these are very powerful tools to be like, hey, this is what's going on in my life. I'm so overwhelmed by it. Let's learn how I can take this thing that I'm overwhelmed by and be not overwhelmed by it. So you're going to learn mechanisms to be able to deal with the big stressful thing that's going on in life. So psychologist, psychiatrist, and then counselors. And professional counselors, fantastic. Sometimes you get like school counselors if you're younger, or like church counselors can be really helpful too. I mean, these are people in the community that are invested in helping you out. So let's take advantage of these resources, right? Okay. What about sleep? Plays a huge role in stuff. So if you're sleep deprived, everything's worse in life, right? Like you're just walking around with like a mild headache because you didn't get enough sleep last night, and then, maybe you are a little bit more like angry or ornery or frustrated or stuff. You just don't feel good. So things like insomnia then become a really big problem. And one of the most underestimated ways to deal with insomnia is proper sleep hygiene. Okay, so I talked about drinking caffeine, right? I think people forget how long caffeine stays in your system, so let's talk about that one. So for lunch, I had 2 cups of coffee. At 8 p.m. tonight, let's say I had lunch at noon. At 8 p.m. tonight, I will have 1 cup worth of coffee of caffeine still in me. All right, so that caffeine hangs around for a long time. So, if you're doing something like, I don't know, I typically drink 4 sodas a day, 4 Diet Cokes a day. I don't know, okay, but then understand that when you're trying to go to bed at whatever, 10, 11, midnight, whatever you go do, you're still gonna have a lot of caffeine in you, and that's a straight up stimulant, right? So it hangs around for a long time. Or if you're, like in medicine, we would say the half-life, how long it takes for you to eliminate half of the caffeine. The half-life of caffeine is 8 hours. We always forget that. The other thing that gets people in trouble, going to bed roughly at the same time every night. So getting into that routine, and oh man, like you see this all the time in like students, high schoolers, college-age kids, people in their 20s, but it's not limited to them. I mean, people in their 70s do the same thing too, right? Where maybe it's, on the weekdays, I got to wake up and go to work, or I got to go to school tomorrow, or whatever. And so, maybe I go to bed on average at 10 p.m. But then it's the weekends, and I get to sleep in tomorrow, so I'm going to stay up until like 3 a.m., something like that, goofing off, watching silly movies, I don't know, playing video games, whatever you're into. Spin class at 1 a.m., I guess, is probably a thing. But then you get off that cycle, like you get off of that type of cycle thing. Well, you get off the cycle. I mean, I didn't mean to do that. I really didn't. But you get off your sleep schedule. And so then it's fine for that weekend, but then, oh my God, like I got to try to go to bed at like 10 a.m. on Sunday night to wake up at like Monday morning, and this is not happening, right? And so then you get into the scenario of I'm trying to sleep. And then you're just like staring at the clock, and then you're getting frustrated and angry, and then you're getting angry at the clock, and you're just staring at the clock. And this poor clock, like he didn't do anything to you, like he's just being a clock. He's doing what God put him on the earth to do. And then you're taking out your anger on this poor clock. I watched Beauty and the Beast for the first time like 2 years ago, and I guess since then I look at clocks differently. So like you're staring at the clock and you're getting angry about it, and then like the mind's going and you're just thinking of stupid stuff, and you're like, damn it, like stop thinking of stupid stuff, and then like this is like we're lost at this point in time, like we're going to be here for a couple of hours, in that type of scenario, there's a couple things that you can do. One, when you're going to bed, get into that routine. So we're keeping it at whatever, roughly plus or minus 1 hour every night of the week. And then when I'm getting ready for bed, it's always the same thing. Okay, like maybe I watch like the evening news or the whatever, and then like I go in here, and then I brush the teeth and I do the thing, and then like whatever, maybe you do some reading or something, some light reading, and then you go to bed. Versus like sometimes people do stuff like exciting stuff right before you go to bed. So I'm watching the big action thing, like a TV show. I don't know. That's not going to help. or once they're trying to get to bed, then they, like they did the thing, it's been more than 15 minutes and now, maybe it's been like 45 minutes or something and now I'm like, the mind's just going. It's okay to get out of bed. You get out of bed, kind of hit the reset clock on this whole thing. Like get out of bed, go into the other room. Do some light reading or whatever you like to do. I don't know, something not exciting. And do that for maybe 15 or 20 minutes and then go crawl back into bed. That's fine. And a lot of times just by resetting that thing, it works really great. The other mistake that people will do, it used to be televisions in the bedroom. And so now I'm just watching like crappy nighttime TV and infomercials and stuff like that. And, but now you get things like cell phones, so now I'm just like, like scrolling through the cell phone and looking at stupid things or social media or whatever. Put the thing away, right? Like those bright screens will keep you awake. From a pill thing, you can use things like melatonin, that's over the counter. But one thing I would encourage you to do is maybe let's not take the melatonin every night, because then you can get into some problems with it. You just take it on the bad nights. So, yes?
I thought there were some studies looking at melatonin for helping. I assume you'd have to take it every day.
Yeah, that's great. So she was saying, I've heard about some studies about melatonin helping HD. And if you're regulating sleep and getting more sleep, you're going to make everything better. So then I'm not surprised at all that saying, hey, melatonin, if we're sleeping more, will then help for Huntington's disease. I don't know the study off the top of my head, so I don't know how it was set up or designed or if they're taking it every night. But one thing that you got to be at least a little bit careful with melatonin is even the lowest dose of the over-the-counter melatonin is like 10 times more than your brain makes on its own. And so then you can, like your brain will stop making its own melatonin, you become reliant on the pill melatonin. And that's okay, but at some point in time, like maybe you run out of the melatonin or something and it takes about a month for the brain to kind of kick it back up and start making it again. Great comment, thank you. Also love the shirt. It's got this it's like this IndyCar thing on it, man. Like, there's other pill options out there too. But that'd be one that you go talk to the neurologist or the psychiatrist about. Suicidality. Let's talk about it, right? Like, so this is a huge thing. Look at the numbers, about 4% suicidality in Huntington's patients versus about 1% in generalized population, which that ratio is about the same of what you see in things like depression or anxiety, so about 3 to 1 suicidality. That loss of hope is such a powerful thing, and that isolation you get from that, where today just isn't worth another day, that type of thing. We got to be willing to break down those barriers and talk about it. And there's a bunch of really great resources there. So like the phone number there, the 1-800 number is fantastic. Talk to somebody now. The 5 action steps for, this is NIH suicide prevention. Ask, keep them safe, be there, help them connect, stay connected. It is perfectly okay to say to somebody that's like severely depressed, like, do you ever think about like hurting yourself or hurting somebody else, or like, let's just talk about it, because then you can open up that avenue of communication. And by talking about it, by communicating about it, then you're breaking down those barriers, right? So it's okay to talk about these types of things. This graph is just another way of looking at the same thing, but basically like the farther over the numbers, the more people get it. And I put this one up there, I like it because it talks about communication and speech problems, right? And I guess if there's one like overall theme here, it's about let's communicate about the thing. Like let's not isolate ourselves let's not isolate ourselves and say, oh man, like I'm gene positive, and then, well, this is just it. Like there is no tomorrow or something, because life moves on, right? And then irritability, aggression, violence, like these are kind of the types of things that come out of that social isolation, anxiety, depression, overwhelm thing. So I kind of think of it in terms of the depression, anxiety, overwhelmed, that manifests itself into things like anger, irritability, aggression, frustration, like those types of emotions. This is like one of my personal favorite slides. So you got Pope Benedict on one side and the Dalai Lama on the other side. And the Dalai Lama there, like, under no circumstances lose hope. Hopelessness is the real cause of failure. You can overcome any problem. Be calm even when the environment is confused or complicated. If your mind gives way to anger, then then even the world is peaceful and comfortable. Peace of mind will elude you. Or the Pope says, one who has hope lives differently, right? And that's a really powerful, simple, straightforward statement. So, I mean, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on this stuff? Or questions about the stuff, or comments, or whatever. Like, we're just hanging out and talking about it, right? Yes, sir.
Remind me what CAG is.
CAG. So CAG is the genetic repeat that you see in Huntington's disease. And for your genes, you only get 4 different molecules that can do your genes when you're looking at the DNA. In the CAG, those are 3 of those 4 that are just, those 3 ones just continue to be in a repeat. CAG, 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 CAG. So you don't get any variation in that repeat. So that's what that means, which we probably don't spend enough time like just talking about that. What the hell is CAG, you know? Like, yeah, like it's just that genetic code, that thing that, it would be sort of like if I was getting across information to you, and then I just kept saying the same thing again and again and again and again and again and again and again. You know, like that type of thing where it keeps going. And those kind of like breaks in the conversation are really important from a genetic standpoint, so that the gene that is, those genes then get turned into proteins, and the proteins are the things that do stuff in your body. Right? And so you need a little bit of space in between those things to say, okay, I'm done with making this protein, and then this next little piece of gene is going to make something different. So that's what it is. It's kind of like the space in between those 2 things. Great question. What was that?
I guess I asked the question wrong. Maybe,
Oh.
but I want to know CAG like HP, Huntington disease.
Uh-huh. Oh, I see. Yeah, the CAG, sorry, we were asking more about CAG. So CAG is just, it's not an acronym. It stands for the chemistry that is that gene. So these are chemical molecules. Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So you talked about the concept of being gene positive, not symptomatic. So what actions would you recommend people taking, especially if they may not qualify for trial with the criteria?
Okay, good. Yeah. So the question is, so I'm gene positive, what action to do regarding clinical trials, and can I get involved in these types of things? And that answer is there's clinical trials for people that are gene positive but asymptomatic. I know there's one at UAB, but my suggestion on any clinical trials is go to clinicaltrials.gov, clinicaltrials.gov, and any clinical trial that's happening in the United States will be listed there. It's a government website, but it's actually really well set up. So like you can just, use Huntington's disease, and then you put that in and it gives you all the studies. And then you can look for kind of the different things, and it gives you the contact phone numbers and all that type of stuff to get involved. As a matter of fact, some of those are really easy to participate in. So like some of those are set up that you don't even have to go to like the location. You can stay in your hometown and stuff and participate in it. So check it out and see what's available. Yes, sir. So the question is, hey, I want to do research studies, and I'm waiting to see if I can qualify or not, and I'm interested in, like, I want to get into doing research that slows down progression of disease and this type of stuff, and then so while I'm waiting to get into one of those studies, what sort of maybe supplements or things like that do you recommend doing, like, in the meantime? Great question. That's a good one, man. I dig that. Something we don't, there's not that one supplement that's just like that golden thing that has the data. Because if it was there and it slowed down the progression of disease, then we would all be doing it, right? One thing I would be careful of with supplements, just as a whole, we need to understand that how they're regulated is very different than just regular prescription medicines. So regular prescription medicines, you have to show 2 studies, 95% confidence intervals to the FDA. Like this thing works. We have to show it for sure. With supplements, they're not regulated at all. So you don't have to have any of that data or anything like that. So with any supplement, what I would tell my patients is just be aware of that's not there. Some of these things can be that the data's not there, that some of these things can be really expensive. And I just want you as the patient to know like where that money's going and what it all means. But I think good advice in life is, in medicine we talk a lot about physiologic reserve. In other words, globally taking care of your own health, right? So things like simple stuff, stay hydrated, take a multivitamin every day, just like the generic over-the-counter, whatever, Walmart brand multivitamin, great advice in life, right? Maybe take a little extra vitamin B12, that type of stuff. Vitamin B12, it's so cheap. You can buy it there at the local grocery store or something. Taking care of other medical conditions, things like if you have diabetes or high blood pressure or this type of stuff, because that stuff adds up over time too. And the reality is that, so we're gene positive, and at some point in time, I'm going to start having the movements that are Huntington's disease. But all those other disease states, the things like the obesity and the high cholesterol and the heart attacks and the diabetes and the diabetic neuropathy and all this type of stuff, those things add in too, right? And they end up playing a big role also. So if we were talking about more advanced Huntington's disease, and we'd be talking about postural instability and falls, like falling down, hitting the ground, which happens later on in Huntington's. So that instability from Huntington's, that happens in and of itself. It's part of the movement disorder. But now imagine that I have this inherent inability to recognize when I'm falling down. The classic line is, before I realized I was falling down, it was too late for me to do anything about it. And now I can't feel my feet because I have diabetic peripheral neuropathy in my feet. So then that adds another layer to it that's going to make you even more likely to fall down. In the big picture, when we're talking about things like Huntington's, like big picture stuff, advanced stuff is going to be, I worry about you falling down, breaking arms, breaking legs, and then choking on foods and liquids. So you're trying to minimize all those outside things before you even get there, right? By doing things like healthy lifestyle, exercise. I feel like I'm channeling my inner Hulk Hogan here. Healthy lifestyle, exercise, take your multivitamins, stuff like that. But it's real. Yeah. Yes. So the question was, what about, we've talked about like progression of neurodegenerative stuff like Alzheimer's disease. And what about avoiding other stuff like alcohol, drugs, those sorts of things? Take care of yourself for projecting where I'm going to be later on in life. Is that about it? Okay, that's about it. All right, good. All things in reason to an extent. Like, if you want to go home and drink some glasses of wine or 1 or 2 glasses of wine, that's okay. Or whatever alcohol drinks you like, beer or whatever, I don't care. Don't drink the whole bottle. That's probably a mistake. And, don't do something stupid like drink the whole bottle every night. Like, that's going to be really bad, with things like drugs, I think really good advice in life is don't do crystal meth, right? So let's not do that. Things like cocaine or crack cocaine, probably a bad idea. Let's stay away from those too. But moderation goes a long way with that type of stuff. It's okay to get out and go enjoy life, right? Like, it's okay to have the drink or two, but just don't get carried away with it. And don't let that be the focus of what you're doing in life. Because you can easily, you get a lot of depression, stress, and anxiety, and you can go down that pathway of alcoholism pretty quick, or substance abuse pretty quick. Is that fair? Yeah, okay. Yes, sir. So the question, question statement, now we're just hanging out and talking part of the venue? All right, good, because I love it. All right, so the question is, I've heard about studies using psilocybin, so if you're not, magic mushrooms. Okay, that's psilocybin, okay? So mild hallucinogenics in Alzheimer's disease, and that may be helpful in Alzheimer's disease. What I worry about with things like that, there's this real push I think in society right now that marijuana makes everything better. And marijuana doesn't make everything better, you know. If you're already kind of on that threshold of dementia, psychosis, hallucination, not quite for sure what is real and what is not real, then maybe these types of things are a really bad idea, right? Because why are we adding this crap on top of all of that as a baseline? What I worry about, you know, these things change a brain. That is very real. Whether that be psilocybin, which would be like classically we associate with mushrooms, or whether that be things like LSD or like acid, that type of stuff, that absolutely changes the brain. And you do enough of those hallucinogenics, and then your baseline state then becomes hallucination, even in a young, healthy brain. You know, with psilocybin, I think that's kind of the sociologic push of what's beyond marijuana, because we think marijuana is good for everything, which it's not. And then now people want to start saying, well, what about mushrooms? They're good for everything too, maybe, right? Well, probably not, you know, like that type of stuff. So I think it's a really good one to talk about. That's a great question. Don't go drop a bunch of acid. Cool question. I don't know, what else? What we got? We're about out of time. Please. Yeah, so it was a great question, which is, hey, so for genetic counselor, I think, right? Was that okay? And so genetic counselor, we do all the like the pre-stuff. We get the gene testing, and then you do the follow-up phone calls, and then you kind of lose track of the patient because they don't call back or they don't answer the phone or whatever. I think there's this kind of like natural thing that. Like you've got this big emotional buildup, and then you get the gene test, and then whatever that answer is, like, you get this big like fall from it of this emotional buildup, and then because the phase really shifts into now I got to deal with whatever that response was, and that kind of natural thing is to not do it, and that's a real mistake because those follow-up phone calls are some of the most important ones. That's a great comment. Yes, sir.
I'll talk.
Yes, please.
I tested 20 years ago before my father even became positive. He barely had a twitch in his hand, and I was about to get married and decided, oh, I'm going to do it. If it is, it is. If it's not, it's not. And he looked at me and laughed and said, I'm going to laugh in your face. I said, oh, you did. And that was the end of it. And took it. It came back positive. I have a very low repeat of 42, but with that being said, that meant that he gave it to me, and he went in his room, stayed there for a good couple days and wouldn't come out. Now, after that positive answer that I got, there was really, I said, well, what next? And my neurologist, the neurologist that tested me, said there is nothing there. But that was 20 years ago. So now that I'm 42 almost, and I'm still non-symptomatic, I'm trying to stop it before it starts because there is now stuff out there that has that. Now, I did stay in bed for a good 5 days and have my pity party, but then I got up and got over my crap and dealt with it. But it was a lot. And now that I'm trying to get involved and get everything where I need to be, I'm trying to pull all those resources from every possible way that I can pull them so that I can get into studies and all that. But there wasn't a lot a long time ago.
Right. That's very true. And so one of the most important things when we're talking about genetic testing, and this is true for Huntington's disease or really any other disease that we're talking about, is that genetic testing doesn't affect just you. It affects your family too. Right, yeah. It affects mom and dad, it affects brother, sister, it affects the kids, like all of that type of stuff. So that's, I think, one of the reasons that genetic counseling is so important is so that everybody in the family understands how this fits together before we go do genetic testing. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. So I really want to thank you guys for being here. Like, that was wonderful. I appreciate it. We're right at time, so we do have to like clean out the room for the next thing. But I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you.